what's out here. It basically said that Mr. Scotland said the committee itself, on the line here, presented its findings to the party's General Counsel and Central Executive. He said the committee was also presenting its report, which of course was at the party convention over the weekend, as the PNM seeks to implement the proposed changes as the government. And in that same convention, Dr. Rowley, the Prime Minister, congratulated the committee, maintaining that constitutional reform was essential for the country's future and well-being. He went on to say that 32 civil society institutions, and again, that's where it gets complicated. He said the EBC Commission, the judiciary, he spoke about the UN, United Nations Human Rights, and then saying in that same breath that he's disappointed to say at this stage that the group of people who are in fact an arm of the government and parliament under the UNC leadership, I am disappointed to say that our country's opposition chose, up to this point, not to partake in this process. Now, if this was a PNM internal process, why would he be disappointed in the UNC for not partaking in it?
And that is my concern. What was discussed at the PNM's meeting on Sunday? Was it the Barry Sinanan report, or was it the Scotland report? Which committee report? Okay. Now, if you tell me it was the Barry Sinanan report, I will take that as a given. But the point about it, the Barry Sinanan report was only made public on Wednesday. I am assuming that the PNM had in this convention or whatever they had it on Sunday, in the works long before Wednesday of last week. And all of a sudden, here is the Barry Sinanan report being made public, and you've been asked now, did people have a chance to dissect what did the Barry Sinanan report suggest? What did they propose? And may I suggest one thing, or may I be very clear about one thing? The Barry Sinanan committee, as far as I am concerned, was a prime ministerial committee. It was not a committee that was developed in fact, it was aptly named an constitutional reform advisory committee, if I'm not sure.
Yes.
Right. So it was not looking at it was to pull and distill ideas and concerns from within the society as a whole that would have fed into the discussions that would go on to constitutional reform when we set up a constitutional reform commission, so to speak. This was just an advisory committee. And the mere fact that it was an advisory committee, it was a prime ministerial advisory committee, meaning that it was formed without any participation or discussion with members of the opposition or anybody else, as far as I know. It was the Prime Minister handpicking Mr. Barry Sinanan, Mr. Terence Farrell, Mr. Nizam Mohammed, Mr. Richard from Tobago, and so on. And the Prime Minister handpicked a committee, which is an advisory committee. Does he really expect the opposition, who had no part to play in that process of selecting the people, or if, for the matter of fact, for that committee that was handpicked by the Prime Minister, but which was never discussed with anybody else, as far as I'm concerned, for the opposition to wholeheartedly welcome and participate in their process? I will tell you, and I have no qualms about saying this. In fact, I think everybody who got the report on Wednesday last week would have gotten in that report an appendix of a list of people who would have submitted proposals for consideration and to kind of guide the advisory committee as to where they go forward. And my name is on that list, so everybody would know that I submitted a proposal, my comments to the committee. But the point about it is that as far as I'm concerned, this was an advisory committee, merely to form a framework on which we go forward to discuss constitutional reform in the main. So I think it is disingenuous by the government to do two things. One, set up an advisory committee parallel to a P&M committee. And secondly, to discuss supposedly the two reports on one day in a P&M meeting. In a P&M meeting, because this was not open to every Tom, Dick, and Harry could have gone to Sunday's meeting.
No, it was. Yes, you're right.
Right? So in a P&M meeting, so clearly, this is not constitutional reform. And then further, as we go further, and you said you spoke to Mr. Taklal Singh earlier.
Yes, I did.
I did not hear that, but I am assuming that Mr. Taklal Singh would have emphasized or underscored the point that we are currently operating under the current constitution that we have in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
And that current constitution dictates and demands that to amend that constitution, we need special majorities. Right. In some cases, a 3/5 majority. In some cases, a 2/3 majority. Right? The PNM does not have a 3/5 nor 2/3 majority in the parliament at this point in time. So when the Prime Minister goes further and tells us that by November we want to have some other convention to discuss constitutional reform, my question here is, again, on what basis? Because as far as I'm aware, and the lawyers will tell me whether I'm right or wrong, but as far as I'm aware, you need, the government as it stands right now will need opposition support. Now, mind you, if the Prime Minister decides to call an election tomorrow, and he calls the election, and he is able to win 29 seats, or 30 seats, which gives him a 2/3 or a 3/5 or a 3/5 majority, he could amend some things in the Constitution based on that majority by himself without having to worry about this obstructionist opposition. I'm using the word obstructionist as an adjective here. But the point about it, until he doesn't have that quota in the parliament, he can't come and tell us he's going to have constitutional reform. We're going to amend the things that need a simple majority.
But so, Dr. Rada, let me ask you then. So, what are we seeing playing out here? Is it just a matter of verbal acrobatics to deflect the real issues? I mean, because Mr. Scotland said, according to the committee's chair, Mr. Scotland, more than 800 people were consulted, while more than 125 people submitted oral and written contributions. Are these all members of the PNM, or is Joe Public a part of that?
I don't know what Mr. Scotland is talking about. Which report? I don't know which report he's talking about.
Well, he said the review began in January and ended in July, when then the report was handed to the Prime Minister.
So I am assuming if he's saying that, then he's saying it is the Barry Sinanan report.
But that's where it gets confusing.
Right? But then why did Scotland start his own committee?
Okay. It brings us back to the question, and what exactly are we seeing playing out here?
All right. So now we come to serious questions. What has played out here? One, we live in a country, in a society that is party politics abounds. We are going into an election. A general election is due. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's been already 4 years since the last general election. So we know that we are heading into the 5th year. An election could be called at any point in time. We know that too. Are we going to be scoring political points to say that the PNM has attempted constitutional reform? And this is where my word before, the obstructionists, opposition don't want constitutional reform. Is that going to be the campaign thrust of the PNM as we move into this election? It could very well be. The question that begs, however, is that as it stands right now, the Parliament as configured, I don't see constitutional reform happening as configured. They could talk as much as they want, and we've had this talk not now. We've had this talk way back in the 1980s when the NAR had 33.3. We started constitutional reform, then talks, the Hayatali Commission. What came out of the Hayatali Commission? Very little. Then in the People's Partnership had, I think it was Hamid Ghani and several others, going around the country collecting views and positions with Prakash Ramadar and saying we want constitutional reform, but then the party did not have the quota, the special majority, and they could not go forward. Mind you, there are little things that you could change.
Yes.
So, for instance, the UNC would boast now that they were able to bring in proportional representation, which they did in the context of local government. But local government was not part of the Constitution, and it's not part of the Constitution. So you could have used a simple majority and bring in proportional representation under the framework of local government. But that did not impact the Constitution. If you want to change the Constitution or amend the Constitution, you need the special majority. So the UNC could go around boasting and beating their chest and say, we brought moved from first past the post, a strictly first past the post, to a mixed system of first past the post and proportional representation, but not through constitutional reform. That was through simple majority legislation passed under local government. That is where we have the real problem.
So
you may recall.
Go ahead.
I'll just allow me this. Mm-hmm. You may recall what happened in 2020 and in 2021. In 2020, we were heading into the THA elections, the first election. The government attempted to bring constitutional reform. To change the constitution that will allow for greater autonomy for Tobago. But of course, there was opposition from the UNC, and there were voices in the Tobago who were saying no, and it was stymied, and it did not go forward. We had the first election in January. After that 6-6 tie in January, the government went forward now and said, we're going to amend the law again with simple majority, so we could now move from 12 seats to 15 seats in Tobago. But there was still the talk of Tobago needs constitutional reform because they need to have greater autonomy and self-government. And when the government took the bill to Parliament and realized they could not get that constitutional majority to change the constitution to give greater autonomy from Tobago, it all went silent. and they fought the election in December, and they lost that election in December. And since then, what have we heard about Tobago? Well, the president said earlier this year we should have constitutional reform to give Tobago more autonomy. So the government jumps up and says, yes, we're going to do it. But when they're going to do it, you know when? We are heading in, the term of the THA ends December next year. So we are going to come back again in the last year before the election to again propose constitutional reform.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, your big question, what's all of this about? It's about party politics.
Right.
It's about party dominancy and party ascendancy. And it's my party in power, and while I'm in power, I will do whatever it is to keep me in power. And I will use whatever campaign I can to carry and to give my party that needed support to say, I tried this, but it's the obstruction opposition who obstruct us.
That's right. And I'm glad you brought that point home, really and truly, because that's what it boils down to. Basically, this is a campaign strategy that is unfolding before our very eyes. And the people are going to be told that, listen, we want to deliver all of this. Referendums, making the Caribbean Court of Justice as the final court of appeal. The opposition is against it because they have cocoa in the sun. Increase autonomy for Tobago. We want to do it. The opposition is against it. Reformation of the Salaries Review Commission. We want to do it, but the opposition is against that. So basically, this whole strategy is about saying, we want to improve your life, but the individuals or the people, the body that is hindering this development is the opposition.
And that is where it is going to go forward into an election campaign.
There you go. We were able to connect the dots. Our time is up, Dr. Raghunath. I want to thank you so much again. Very insightful. So now we know. And closing comments?
Well, basically, all I can say is simply that I am still, we do need constitutional reform, but we need to have constitutional reform on a bipartisan basis, not on a one party or the party in government pulling together their own advisory committee and saying that that is the report on which we're moving forward on. And we need to sit down like mature, serious people. But if we're going to have what we had over the weekend as the approach to be taken, we're not really keen about constitutional reform. We're keen about winning power and staying in power. And mind you, if I ask the closing comments, one other point, the refusal to use fixed dates in an election, as well as to consider a mixed system of whether first past the post and proportional representation, because I think my proposal was we could have a first past the post in the lower house and proportional representation in the upper house. That way we allow people to have, the government not to have that strong overwhelming majority in the upper house to pass everything they want. But the refusal to do that is simply an attempt to maintain the status quo. For when a party is in government, they do not want to change the constructs that will allow them to do as they please. And that is what, so I don't blame the PNM, don't get me wrong. I am not blaming the PNM. PNM is doing exactly what they have to do, because they want to stay in power and they want to ensure that they will continue and they will maintain their position in power based on the existing constitutional provisions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah. Well, that says it all there, people. It says it all right there. We got like 1 minute, so very interesting. So again, Strong Heart is an all-natural omega-7 supplement that has been shown in clinical studies to be associated with heart health by supporting healthy cholesterol and inflammation levels. Research has shown that increased blood levels of omega-7 is associated with healthy HDL. So if you want to make sure and keep your heart not stressed out and to keep it pumping and to keep your love muscle strong, get your bottle of Heart XL today. Quite interesting that we were able to connect the dots on what is being laid out here. And rather disingenuous of the government. But again, I think that Dr. Raghunath was on point when he said that whatever it takes, by any means necessary, to stay in government. And if you know that, and if you're not being, services, you're not getting the service that you want, you're not getting the deliveries of whatever it is that you need to get access to, then you have to ask yourself, are you going to be voting against yourself? How many times have you bought into this? These verbal acrobatics about one thing, and here it is, you're camouflaging it to look like something else, but are you going to get caught up in that? That's the main question. So, at least we know the campaign has started, and it's going to be all about blaming the other side. The other side is the one that's hindering you from development. The other side is preventing you from getting the best quality of life. The other side is the one that's keeping crime high in numbers. The other side is the one that's, maintaining this whole issue with home invasions and poor health care and the poor education system. But are you going to buy into that? That is the key question, because as you can see, anything to stay in power. That brings us to the end of our program. Sorry we didn't get a chance to open the lines, but we will tomorrow, God willing. Don't forget, 7 p.m., right back here on Guile TV. Again, Flow, Amplia, Tigo, Facebook, YouTube. And, of course, the interviews will be on YouTube. So subscribe to The Observer TT, and you will have those interviews as soon as it comes out after the program. Again, it's been a pleasure. Remember, we're observing, but action is right around the corner. Have a good one.
Observer. Mikey K, Mikey K, Mikey K, Mikey K.